Hey, Dan.
Hey,
Welcome to Founder Design Thinking. I'm so happy to have you here.
thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
Well, everyone, please comment where you're listening in from. But we have Dan Blumberg from Artium Consulting, and you're listening to Founder Design Thinking, episode 10. I'm Jay Z. I love taking companies from 0 to 1. I advise, and now I also offer software for creativity, opportunity sizing, and note taking. But this episode is about Dan and demand testing. So, Dan, I'm just going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
All right. Well, hey, I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm a product and engagement leader at Artium. We're about a 100-person innovation studio. We partner with startups and big enterprises. We help them build great products, great teams, and great capabilities so they can build long after we're gone. That's really our focus, is like long-term sustainability. My background is in product, and before I was in product, I was in public radio. I was on the product team at the New York Times, which I'm sure we're going to get into. I was at LinkedIn, also building sort of news and content focused products. And I was at City Ventures very recently as an entrepreneur in residence, running a lot of demand tests. We're going to talk about demand tests today. And today, as I mentioned, I'm at Artium. I also host our podcast at Artium. Podcast is called Crafted. We were just honored by the Webbies as a best tech podcast of the year, which is kind of fun as a return to my original audio days. The show is all about great products and the people who make them. And we love to get into the weeds of what it takes to build great products, as we're about to right now.
Dan, can I ask, is podcasting kind of a fountain of youth for you because it takes you back?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, it is absolutely not why Artium hired me. They hired me to lead engagements and to be a fractional chief product and tech officer to the clients that we serve. And literally on my first day, one of our designers mentioned, "Oh, we're thinking of maybe doing a podcast." And I said, like, "Hi, I worked in audio. As a top producer for a decade, at WNYC and elsewhere. And if we're serious about this, I can help." So yes, actually, it is really lovely to go back to my. I've been doing audio since college. I started doing college radio. So it is somewhat of a fountain of youth. I hadn't thought of it that way. But yes, it does make me remember, my early professional days.
Well, you heard it here because I also agree. I think podcasting makes you younger. Not just you, like all of us. I feel like when you're talking to someone and they're in your ear, it's such a really connected experience. Nothing like social media at all. So
It's lovely. And the other thing that I didn't fully appreciate, because this is the first time that I've really I've always done a lot of hosting. Back in the day, I would host All Things Considered or Morning Edition. It's a news show, and I do interviews. But now, it's like a weekly interview that I'm doing. I get to talk to, just like you're doing right now. I get to talk to really interesting people, ask them all kinds of questions. Like, you get this permission when you're the interviewer to ask questions that you might not think to ask. If you're just kind of hanging out. So I learn a ton from these interviews, and I hope everyone listening in will learn something from this.
well, let's get into it. So we have 3 questions. The first one I'll start off with is, what's the most surprising thing that has happened in one of your design thinking sessions?
Um, so I've used design thinking at a couple different places. I mentioned the New York Times. I mentioned City Ventures as are probably the two that we'll talk about the most. The most surprising thing is just, I don't know. It's just getting to know people's needs and particularly matching those needs to particular moments or jobs they need to do. And at City, I joined, my background, as I mentioned, journalism. Then I worked in product, in news, and then I joined City Ventures, knowing almost nothing about finance or consumer banking. I never thought I'd work in that field. I found it interesting. I thought I would give it a try. What's the worst that happens? It's a huge industry in New York, and if I hate it, at least I'm smart about it. It felt like it was good for the career. And it turned out I really found it fascinating. And in particular, I just talk about how interesting it is to interview people. I got to talk to people about money. Ask my questions like you really would not ask at the dinner table, right? I know you have background at Capital One, so maybe you've done the same. To talk to people about money, and the work that I did was mostly around wealth management. Citi is investing in new solutions for wealth management, and so I got to talk to people about their goals, how they want to retire or what that next big milestone is, or how they're thinking about money, how they're saving or not. And I was able to ask these questions, and I try to always do so in a way that like is not causing any kind of, there's no judgment, there's no guilt. It's just like, tell me about this. Well, and then you sort of go through the 5 whys and understand like root causes. And so what I found really fascinating in all these money conversations, and wealth building conversations, was just understanding where people felt like they were doing well on their own, where they needed help. I mean, that's obviously what I was very interested in, is like, where might a financial advisor, and I use that in the broadest term right now, like human, machine, both, like just where might an advisor, however it's enabled, now we have, we didn't have Chat GPT then, but like, just how might something like that help them? And so really understanding, what their needs are was really fascinating. And it started with these, really deep jobs to be done style interviews that we would do. And then we would progress. And once we had sort of some signal, we would run some different tests around what we had learned.
Can you share any ahas, something that you didn't expect?
I didn't expect. I mean, one thing that, like, financial advisors, this is not a something that people didn't quite know, but to be able to prove it with data, I thought was interesting and was new. Life events matter a huge amount. So I mentioned retirement is one, but like selling a business is another. Getting a divorce is a huge one. Like when people, oftentimes there's one spouse that's more involved in the finances of the family than the other. And so, talking to people who are going through a life event like that, or the stress of, selling a business, or having another kid, or getting married is another one. All these life events really mattered. And so when we started to, understand some of these moments, there was one actually. So here's an anecdote from an interview. I talked to a woman who, and we often look for exactly this kind of person who is actually struggling with whether they should adopt a new solution or not. And this is a woman who, if I remember right, she was in, I think, South Carolina, and she and her partner had, they both had decent jobs, but they didn't grow up with a ton of money. They had started renting a lot of homes. That was a second source of income for them. And suddenly, like, it sort of like snuck up on her. Like suddenly she's like, whoa, like we have this money. Like, are we like allowed to have this money? Like, can we be trusted with this money? Like, and the particular moment that triggered it was they had a couple of rental houses and they sold one. And so again, I talk about like moments where you might need help, you might need advice. So they'd sold this home, or no, actually, sorry, they hadn't sold it. They had just finished paying off the mortgage. So like a huge, monthly payment had just gone off their books. And she was just like, oh my God, we have all this money, and like, I don't know how, I don't trust myself. Her husband, like they weren't. So she had been Googling. She actually knew the phrase fiduciary. So she's actually been Googling like financial advisor fiduciary. I think she heard on a podcast or something that like you want a fiduciary because they're legally responsible for giving you the best advice, or advice that's appropriate to you. Unlike some advisors that don't have that legal obligation. So she knew enough to like Google that, but she had yet to make a phone call to call someone yet. And so it was a fascinating interview because she was actually at that struggling moment, as it's called in like jobs to be done speak. Like there were things pushing her to this new solution. There was, I've got all this money. I don't quite know if I'm doing it right, but then pulling her away was like, can I trust this person? Like, I'm just like, she didn't really know even how to find the right person or the right solution. I'm saying person, but what I mean is like solution. And so she was a fascinating person to interview. We also got into like some gender stuff because she was concerned, and this is something I heard from other people as well, that like the financial industry is like more geared towards men than it is towards women. She wasn't sure if like she would find someone that like was truly going to like listen to her. And so that was that conversation was actually one of the very first ones I did. And we kind of got lucky that she was actively, we'd done like a pre-screener to like trying to get a sense of where people were at in their process. But like we got lucky with her that she was like really in the middle of this like uncertainty of what should I do next. So that one really stuck out to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I did a lot of research at Capital One, and from the wealthy to the not wealthy, everyone has a reason to feel bad about their finances. So a lot of what we did to drive trust is to make people feel good about the things that they were doing to manage their money and help them with savings and other bundles of products. But the very wealthy have a lot more to worry about too. So it is a interesting insight.
Yeah, and the other thing, I mean, a lot of the research that I was doing at Citi was targeted at the wealthy, but not like the top 1 or 2% of America, but like not the top 0.01. And man, there's a lot of anxiety among, folks in the top 1 or 2% that they're not, in the top 0.1%, right? The Succession crowd, or even a level down from the Succession crowd for those that watch that show. Because there is just a ton of pressure to keep up, or to send your kids to private schools or things like that. There are obviously much bigger problems in life than like my kids are going to a private school or not. But like these are real stresses, and so it was really interesting to, like I said, just to be able to have these really frank conversations. And I think sometimes actually the people that I would talk to, they found it therapeutic, right? Because it's not something that like they would often just chat about, right? But to really understand, who's managing their own investments, who is leaning on an advisor, why are they happy with that advisor, what job is that advisor playing? Sometimes the job is actually, so the other surprising thing is very few people that I spoke to had an advisor because they were looking to beat the market. They don't expect that anymore. Like with index funds and lots of other things, and like most advisors don't, quote unquote, beat the market. What they were really hiring the advisor for was peace of mind, which came in a lot of different ways. One of which is kind of morbid, but is the like, when I die, my spouse is going to have someone to talk to who knows like everything about everything. That came up a fair amount. But it was also just like peace of mind that, like, back to that woman who had not hired someone, but it was like, this is a respectable trust, if she found that person, like a respectable, trusted person who is going to like help me manage my money and save me from myself. That was the other peace of mind, right? Again, making sure you find the right person or solution if it's not a person per se.
Awesome. I think because you're a New Yorker, it makes sense that there's always like more money, or that like, why am I not there even though I've arrived at this place? So it's funny. I'm glad I'm not in New York anymore, but I do miss it.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to question 2. How much impact has design thinking made your company, and I think specifically demand testing?
So I'll talk more about, so at Artium, absolutely, we employ lots of design thinking techniques, lean startup techniques, extreme programming techniques on the engineering side. I could go talk more about pair programming and the value of that if we wanted to get into that. But design thinking and sort of lean startup techniques broadly have been really influential to me. I started working in product after my first career in radio. Like the book, The Lean Startup, came out like right around when I was making this transition from producer to product manager. I didn't even know the phrase product manager for the first, decade of my career. And Lean Startup came out for me at the perfect time. So that's kind of where I am grounded, is sort of in lean startup techniques, build, measure, learn, repeat. And so, when we identified some hypotheses from the deep interviews that we did, at Citi, we then had some hypotheses around like what might compel people to sign up for, some new solutions around wealth management in this case. And this could apply to wealth management or any number of things. We would run tests, very simple tests, without Citi's name on them, by the way, because, and this would apply to a lot of companies, but being a highly regulated financial industry, like a financial institution, they're very, very careful about what they put their name on for legal and lots of other risks, as you can imagine. I can see you're smiling. You've been through this. But also like at the New York Times is not a regulated industry. But if you take the New York Times name off of a product, you do two things, right? Like one, like you're testing the solution itself without the halo or the harm of the brand. People might love the New York Times or Citi or LinkedIn or other places that I've worked. And if you just test the concept, you get in some ways you get a clearer signal of like, is there demand for this product or not? In other ways, you might say, well, I don't know who, especially in finance, like, oh, I don't know who these people are. Like, I'm not gonna trust these people. But oh, it's like this 200-year-old bank, so there's that benefit as well. But we would test things very often. The first test we would do once we had a hypothesis for, okay, here's a new solution that we could offer. We can create a very simple website, like a one-page website that calls out, here's this new solution. Maybe we did some tests around things like Wealthfront has coined the phrase self-driving money. Sort of automating your finances and having sort of, not just robo-advisors, but like other automated systems that help you with your money. And like, I remember one of the phrases we used was like, get alerts whenever a threat or opportunity to your wealth emerges, like, and there's a sign up box, sign up here. Do you want to sign up for this product? And so a very simple website, doesn't have the big institution's name on it, doesn't, it's not even a fully built app. It's just a landing page, right? We're talking about a landing page test here. But the key to this kind of test is, will someone give you something of value to sign up, to be on the wait list? We would often phrase it like, be on the wait list. We're not trying to promise things that, didn't really exist, but like join the wait list, sign up for early access, that sort of thing. And if you get someone to give you something of value, in our case, an email address, could be a phone number, I kind of treat those as like they gave us $1. And getting someone to give you that first $1 is really, really, really hard. And so if you can run a test where you can prove that someone will give you something that is valuable, and email address is not nothing. It's not a huge thing, but it's, people are careful about where they, share their data. That's a huge signal. And so what we would do is we would create a website like that. Simple website, has the, the name of the product, which is often a placeholder name, but like a name of the product, a value proposition, self-driving money, see threats and opportunities to your wealth when they emerge, sign up here for early access. There'd be more to the web page than that, but not much more. And then we would create a bunch of ads on whatever channels felt appropriate. Very often it was Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, which can be expensive, but LinkedIn sometimes, depending on the audience you want to reach. You create a custom audience. So again, like, a key thing, like not every product is for every person. Like you want to be really, really specific about who it is for. And with Facebook and the other social media, like you can really, really target to an insane degree who you want to see that ad. And so we would do that. And then on Google, on search, you can target intent, which is different and also very powerful. So that woman who was searching for, fiduciary in my area or something like that, we could target those keywords. We could target, I'm worried about retirement or some other keywords, right? So you don't know who the person is, not as granularly as you would on social, but you know what they searched for, which is really powerful. And so we'd run ads, we'd A/B test the ads, and you can do this with a pretty, at least 2 years ago when I was doing this, you could do this with a pretty low ad spend, $5,000, depending on the audience. And from that, you can get a really clear signal on which ads perform the best, which had the highest click-through rate, which of the people who clicked on the ads then went to the website, gave their email address. You can therefore derive a cost per acquisition. You know how much you spent on the ads, how many people signed up. So you get your CPA. And so from that, you now have like a really clear sense of like, did any of the concepts we tested work? Which one worked the best? Roughly, what is the cost that it might take to acquire customers, right? They're just giving you an email address right now, but you're getting a sense of like CPA, which is a really, really important metric for any startup or any business. What's it going to cost to acquire new customers? You haven't optimized it yet. Like you could do a lot of optimization on the CPA, but like you have a rough sense of like, at least to get our foot in the door with this type of customer, what's it going to cost? But again, you get proof that people will give you something of value, versus you could do this whole thing with like, in a lab or through surveys or stuff like that. And it's so hypothetical. There are appropriate uses for surveys and things like that. But generally, like whenever I have the chance to like run a real experiment, I'm going to run a real experiment. Because if you ask someone, questions on a survey, they're going to answer, and this is the same as true with interviews, although you can suss this out a little bit better with interviews. They're going to answer as though they are their ideal self. So if you ask them like, how often do you go to the gym? Oh, well, obviously I go 4 or 5 days a week. And then if you run an experiment, you measure how often do they go to the gym, they're going once a week, or whatever. And so that bias is often very present in surveys, and it's hypothetical. Whereas with the availability, like the ease with which you can create a simple website, some ads with a fairly low ad budget, like you can learn more quickly and more reliably than the sort of more hypothetical methods like lab testing or surveys or interviews are always where I start, but interviews only tell you so much, and from that then you derive hypotheses, then you can run experiments.
I love this concept. It just sounds so much faster and cheaper. And anyone in the audience, if you have questions, but just to summarize, you're saying for a 5K marketing budget split between social and search, you maybe run it for a month, and then you have a one-pager web page. It has a button, like no other flows or links. It just goes to one place. Is that kind of
pretty much? Yeah, I don't want to guarantee the $5,000 thing, especially because inflation's become very much a thing since then. And also the other thing that's significantly different from when we started doing these tests at Citi is, and this is now like a year or two ago, but iOS's the changes they made to privacy really hurt some of the tracking capability in Facebook, particularly, but any app, not just Facebook. Snap and others have also had trouble like adapting. So it's a little harder. It's probably therefore more expensive. So I don't want to promise the $5,000 things, but yes, the concept of run some ads, pick the right channels, pick the right audience, the right keywords, simple website. Do people give you something of value? Start with their email address or phone number. If they do give you that, and you think, great, let's keep building. There's signal here. Then go to more progressively hard to give things. So like you might ask, like for example, we ran some tests where we would create a lightweight app where people had, if they connected their bank account or their credit card spending via Plaid, which is a third-party integrator, we could give them some insights on their spending. We're not moving money. We didn't ask them to pay for the service yet, but like, would they find it valuable? Would they open our emails? So, if you sort of go up the ladder from like, okay, do they give us their email address, sign up for a wait list? Yes, great. Would they do something more? Would they share it with a friend? Would they, actually sign up for a free trial? Like give us their credit card, but we're not going to charge their credit card. There are a bunch of like more advanced things you can do. You can keep building out functionality. At this point, you want to start thinking about retention much more. So it's great that you can acquire people. Do they actually stay beyond their first use of the app? It's when I learned this at the New York Times, years ago when I first started looking at like new app downloaders and like how many of them actually open the app a second time, and I saw the graphs, which is like the survival charts if you've ever seen them. They're applied both in medicine but also in like apps. So they start at 100 and then they like plummet to like 100 people open the app on day one, and then it's like 10 on day two, and then it plateaus. It usually has a very sharp drop, and then it kind of steady. So you want that first drop to be as high as possible. And I could go on about different retention stuff I did at the New York Times, but like focusing on retention becomes more important now that you have a working app. So the cost per acquisition is great, but like most people are going to churn unless you nurture them, create a habit, help them create a habit.
Yeah, I think what's so controversial about demand testing is that it doesn't require a wireframe or a designer. You can just write about it. So I know you have a deck that's beautiful. You're going to share that in a minute. But I noticed in the deck that the screenshots you have don't have like a picture of what the app looks like, or don't have always what the final product will look like. And so in design sprints, we spent like half of them sketching, and in Figma later on, we spent like months in Figma before you can get a clickable prototype that a user in a lab will click through and talk to you about. But what I think is really controversial about demand tests is like anyone can just write a couple of sentences, put a button, buy some ads, and you're done.
I think all of those approaches are valid. I'm not at all saying you should not do what you just described, because we do the same thing, at Artium, when it's appropriate, right? So yes, like a good first step would be the demand test, the websites are pretty easy to build. They're probably sneaky easy because like so much of it is the copy.
Yeah.
Like so much of it is how you describe both the problem that you're trying to address for a specific user and what your solution is. You could have art that shows what the app might look like. It doesn't have to be final. If you think that's going to be necessary for people to sign up and give that email address, like 100%, you can include that. But I'm not at all trying to dismiss like other methods like you just mentioned. I think those are totally valid, and there is value in having, early users look at something, in a lab setting, and just understand. Where I see the lab setting most useful, at least where I saw it being used, I think a lot of companies use the lab setting and they're like, oh, of course we'd never release something without research. But the research that they're doing too much of and not enough of the other kind of research is they're doing too much usability research. And that's where I see the lab. I've consulted to a couple of banks now, and that's often where like research, there's usually like two big phases of research. One is like huge, like 50, 75 page deck, which is based on surveys, different survey methods, conjoint analysis, min-max, like variety of different survey techniques. Again,
I love conjoint, but yeah.
Conjoint is very useful. I'd love to hear more about why you like, I think particularly with pricing, like figuring out the right bundle, the right price, it's very, very useful for that. But it's still hypothetical, right? Like if you take a conjoint a survey, it's like, describes a product and describes that product in like 12 different variations and tries to figure out which version you like the best and at what price. But it's still very hypothetical. You're still saying, yes, I would pay $4 if you had features A, B, and C. Yes, I would pay $2 if it were features B, C, and E. And it's hypothetical. The demand test, you can prove that a little bit more by what they actually do. So the key thing here is like if you take a survey as a user, you're being tested. Again, back to that like ideal self. And so if you don't take a demand test, you're unaware that you're participating in a test. Right, you see an ad on Instagram, you click on the ad, you click on the website, you give your email address. Like it's not clear that like it's a test. I mean, people know that like there's tons of tracking on the web and all that, but like it's not clear that they're being tested in the same way that if you take a survey. So that's the big difference. Is you get away from this hypothetical self. It's still useful. Like these are all appropriate techniques for for the right scenario. I just like to get to like the real world experiments as quickly as possible.
And one last question before we get to your deck. So in terms of what the design test provides, that the demand test does not provide, not in terms of usability, but in the empathy space, I think I'm curious, like, you've had your empathy interviews, now you have your demand test, and then in the kind of demand design test, what do you get that the demand marketing test doesn't provide?
So I might actually think of it, I mean, again, we're kind of abstract or without a specific example, but I would probably think of it in the order of like, you do the, empathetic interview, job speed on style interview, really, 5 whys, all that stuff. Before building the demand test, I might create the design test, as you were just calling it, like create a wireframe or something like that. And one of the techniques that I really like to do there is create something that is deliberately to the extreme, that is provocative. I love using prototypes, especially like crude, kind of rough prototypes, to stimulate conversation in a way that like just talking to someone, you may not get it out of them. So like one example of this is when I was at the New York Times, one of the roles that I had there was to head product for NYT Global, which was our effort to get readers outside the US. And I remember on a field trip to Canada, we were trying to understand like to what extent do Canadians want the New York Times or like a Canadian version of the New York Times. And one way that we tested that, and we would never, ever have launched this, like we just wouldn't have, but it was to spark a conversation in the user research, was like, put a maple leaf on it. Like if you take the New York Times and like you put a maple leaf on it, like guess what you get? You get a bunch of pissed off Canadians, and then they go on and they say like, we always get the junior version of this, and like we don't want the up north version. Like just give us the real deal.
I see.
Versus when we did similar questions and experiments in Australia. Australia was like, we would love like a bespoke New York Times. Like, oh my God, like we're down under, like, who thinks about us? Like, you want to think about us? Like, great. But it's by using like deliberately provocative things in design that I think you can actually elicit more of that, like deeper understanding of what your customer wants, or in this case, does not want.
Fabulous. Let's see the deck.
All right. We've talked through most of it, but let's It'll, hang on one second. Oops, sorry.
So you've got the add present button in the middle.
Yeah, I've got it. I'm just trying to find the right tab. There's a million tabs, as always. Here we go. Okay, so Artium, that is where I work. This is who I am. I mentioned Crafted is the show that I host about great products. There will be a QR code at the end. You can get your phones ready for the very end. We sort of talk through this, but if it's helpful, I can sort of go through like the 3 parts of jobs to be done that I find really, really compelling. One is, first of all, what is a job? It is a new way of making progress. And the struggling moment is, I described it before with that woman from South Carolina. She wants something new. She needs some help with her finances, but she's not sure, like if the solutions out there are really right for her. So she had things pushing her and things pulling her away. I should just skip right to this because that's what this speaks to.
Dan, can you go full screen on this slide? It's just a little small.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So this is something that in the interviews, in those design provocations that we talked about, that I really listen for. What are the things pushing you to a new solution? What are the things pulling you away from a new solution, right? So like things pushing you to might be like, oh, it's on sale. I want to make this better. Like the on sale will be the top right corner there. Like, ooh, like it's magnetic. There's something pulling me. I want to make some new progress. But then there are things that are holding you back, like the switching costs. Oh, I'm happy how I am. Even if you're not happy, like switching is too expensive. And then there's just uncertainty. And so I could go deeper on this, but I won't. But the point is, like, you want to listen for like the things that are pushing and pulling from a new solution. And the last thing I just want to mention is when you listen for jobs, and this I learned, only a couple of years ago, and I was really started to go deep on the jobs to be done stuff, is the 3 types of jobs. And it's very easy to forget some of these, particularly the social one, I would sometimes forget. So a functional job is very simple. I want to accomplish, X, Y, Z. I want to get, in the, I want to, grow my wealth. It's very functional. Emotional, like I want to feel secure, right? And then social, and there are a lot of social jobs in wealth and lots of other places, but like I want to be seen as like why do I want to buy like I see this all the time, like why do people drive pickup trucks? There's so many pickup trucks all over the place that never ever ever go off road, right? People are not buying it for the functional job of getting up a steep dirt road or whatever you see on the commercials on TV, right? They're always like driving up like a mountain road in the snow and the ice and. But in reality, people drive their pickup trucks to the grocery store and they schlep their kids around, right? And that's a social job because in their mind, they want to be seen as someone that like off-roads. In reality, they don't, but it satisfies a social job. And so remembering these 3 types of jobs when you do those interviews and understand your customers' needs, I found really powerful just to keep these 3 things in mind. It's hard to figure out what jobs people are looking for. It's very easy to look at demographics, age, income, etc., but that has nothing to do with why people choose a product. Like you don't buy a pickup truck because you're a 43-year-old dad, as I am, right? You buy it, and I don't have a pickup truck. I have a minivan because I'm more functional and I have 3 kids. But you understanding what job people are trying to accomplish is really, really important. And to do that, you have to talk to people. Okay. Any questions on any of that, or should I just roll through? And I can't see the audience questions, so if there are any of those, please let me know.
No, I think let's keep going.
Okay. So as we talked about, a demand test is a real world experiment to measure demand for a new product. We talked about this, but interviews, surveys in the lab gives you hypothetical behavior. It's what people say they will do. It's not what they actually do. And we talked about this as well. They know they're being tested, and in a demand test, ideally, they do not know that they are being tested. They're just seeing something. They think it's real. It may say coming soon, but they don't know that it's a test per se. And so from that, you get more behavior that's more reflective of how they might behave, when your thing really truly is live. We sort of talk through these, but this is sort of a typical process. And by the way, the landing page tests that we've talked about are particularly common in B2C. because there you can create that custom audience. It's probably a mass audience you're looking for. You're probably looking for, at least will 1 million people sign up for this thing? In a B2B context, the equivalent, I mean, there are many, many, many different experiments you can run. And I recommend the book from David Bland called, I'll think of it and come back to it. It's got the word experiments in it. But David Bland has a good book that lists it's like 50 or 100 different types of experiments you can run. I think it's called Proving Business Value or Running Business Experiments. But so you create a hypothesis, based on the interviews you've done, you create the custom audience and the ads, you create that simple website. And again, will people give you something of value to sign up for the service that you are offering or that you were saying is coming soon? So here's an example that a friend of mine, this is actually based on some work that we did together at Citi. This is an example of a very simple website. This is actually not the full thing. I won't click on the link because I think it'll mess up the screen sharing. This is the top of the web page, but you can see it's very simple, right? Will people give an email address? Will they sign up? There's I think an alpha version of this, or it says right here a beta version of this right now. So there is more behind this wall, but this is how simple a website can be with ads. And I would A/B test the ads that point to it and understand which problem, which solution, which framing of that solution, really works the best. These are just other examples. These are not demand tests, but these very well could be, right? Like these are all, and the reason I put all these screenshots together here is they speak to different struggling moments of like things pushing and pulling. So if you look at in particular, each of these examples, like if you look at the bottom left, the garbage removal from 1-800-GOT-JUNK, like it speaks to all of the struggling moments that people might have. Like, we'll do everything for you. We're going to sweep up for you. You're not going to have to do anything. Like it's all of these speak to anxiety that people might have about signing up for this service. And so these are some ways that you can, if you learn that from the interviews and other techniques, you can include that. You could A/B test. I'm sure all these ads that are shown here, I'm sure, Casper in particular, I'm sure is A/B testing, many versions of that ad and learning as they go.
So I want to call out that the call to action to sign up with your email is always at the top. There's no like scrolling.
Yep.
The call to action is always above the fold, and it's really just you're testing a couple of lines, maybe a 1-sentence line, and then even above that, like a heading. And that's all it takes to run this demand test. I assume underneath there's like a little more text for people who don't
typically
sign up.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that the typical structure of these single page websites, and there are a ton of them out there, is something like what you see here in the Calendly example. And then there's, sort of, you think of it as like a 3-act play. There's like, the intro. The intro also has the sign up button in case you're immediately ready. Then there's, more material. Then you get to the bottom of the page and there's that sign up box, reappears. Maybe it persists actually as you scroll the whole way down. Just to lose the opportunity for someone to do so. But yeah, I mean, if you go back to I mentioned that the book, The Lean Startup, came out right when I started, working in product around 2012. The classic example, I believe, from that book was Dropbox had just launched. And Dropbox very famously launched with nothing more than a video. They had a single page website and they had a video that was a video of, the power of Dropbox, of, what it would mean to like have files that are both local to your machine, but also sync to the cloud constantly. And that was their demand test. They put that website up with the video. People fell in love with the video and they signed up and they joined the wait list, in droves. So it doesn't have to be text. It can be a video. It can be, you see a lot of like animated things right now, but the point is like whatever it takes to get people intrigued, interested, and then you capture something of value, you put them on the wait list, or maybe there's an alpha version of the product available immediately. They can start using it. But that's the goal is, to get them, make it easy for them to sign up. And then you have an audience of people that you can keep learning from. Sort of talk through this. These are some of the things that you can measure, right? Which of the things you tested resonates the most? What's the best way to frame a problem? Sometimes it's not the solution you're testing, but it's more how do we frame it in a way that people will be compelled. That kind of speaks to the slide just a second ago of the various pieces of anxiety that might prevent someone from signing up for any of those services I just showed. And again, like I said, you get a rough cost per acquisition estimate, right? Pre-optimization and understanding you're going to ask for them to do more next. We talked about this a bit. Like you can, go from one demand test to another, and you can just keep raising the stakes. Will users do more and more? And each time they do, you say, wow, like we're really onto something here. And again, don't forget to focus on retention. And the other thing I just want to call out is like, if you run one of these tests and people don't like what you are selling, that's okay. In fact, that's great, because you just learn that really cheaply and quickly. And now you have, ideally you always have like a backlog of like 10 more things we could be trying. And you really should have pressure from those 10 things to, accept or reject the thing you're doing today. So like if this thing's not working, like I got 10 great ideas that just can't wait to get out. And so it forces you to make a decision whether you're going to, I think in the lean startup language, like pivot, persevere, or kill, right? So what are you going to do? And you should have like a sign of a really, really healthy product organization is when they're killing products, because it means that they're focused and they have other things that they want to focus on. And if something's not working, they're not afraid to put an end to it, sunset it, as we delightfully say. This is more about me. There's that QR code for Crafted. But what else can we get into, JZ?
So just to follow up on that, and if anyone has questions, please put them in the comments. So in the enterprise organizational structure of marketing, product managers, program managers, are product managers doing this themselves, or are they working with marketing who has some of the Facebook, ads or Google ads accounts?
I think it depends. I think it depends a lot on the organization. I mean, I don't know that everyone is doing this at all. For those that are, I think this is probably most common. If I had to guess, it's probably most common among quote unquote growth PMs, right? There's, for better or for worse, is sort of a specialization of PMs called growth PMs that are very focused on onboarding, very focused on retention typically. And I think they are more likely to have, they're or growth hackers are sometimes called, right? Like I think they're more likely to have that tight relationship with marketing, where product and marketing are much more intertwined than in sort of traditional organizations where they may be less so. I think it's a very company specific question. Ideally, you're working very closely with not just a marketer, but also a data analyst who is going to help you. And this is something I was very blessed. Both, at a few places I've worked, but in particular LinkedIn. LinkedIn has such massive scale. We could run A/B tests, and unless we were testing something really, really, really arcane, you could have results from the A/B test within a couple of days or a week, a couple of weeks at the most, for most things. And there were a lot of PMs were actually really, really good with data, and they could self-serve, but you also had lots of data scientists that would help you make sure that your results were statistically significant. So like one thing I would just caveat for folks doing this for the first time is like, you have to understand, what does it actually mean for variant A to beat variant B? Is it actually a statistically significant change, or is it just like random chance that version A won? And so understanding the math behind that and like the sample size you need, that actually speaks directly to the budget. You asked about the $5,000 ad spend. Like depending on what you want to learn, you have to understand like, okay, well, if I want to learn, will people sign up? I need to have at least, 10,000 people hit the web page. I need to have at least, 200 of them sign up. That would give me statistical significance. I'm totally making up all these numbers. But the point being, like, you can back into how much money you think you need to spend based on, what the current rates are with the search and social media sites. And so just understanding, like, it's not just marketing. You want to either be really, really great with data yourself, or you want to be working with someone. Often marketers are really, really good with data. So it might be that person, or it might be a data scientist that you're working with to help you analyze the results and make sure you're not making a big decision on what's actually just statistical noise.
Yeah, and if you get the wrong people or it's seasonality, you want to make sure that
Yep.
like B really beat the A, the champion challenger. Like, is it going to be repeatable?
Mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah, and the other thing I would mention, when you create that A/B test, I mean, this is make sure if you're, don't have version A is completely different from version B. There have to be something that's constant. And so one big thing that I've seen people do and not realize it is they'll have version A, which has like an image and a little bit of copy that describes what the thing is that you're trying to sell. And then version B is a different image and different copy. And Instagram, Facebook, like it's so much of it is about the image. And so if you don't keep that image constant, you can change the copy, or you can have 4 versions, like, 2 images, 2 versions of copy, and then the 4 variations thereof. But if you're just comparing 2 things and the images are not constant, I think you're just testing the image, and that's all you're going to learn, like which image performs better. So be very, very aware that you have a constant variable as you run these tests.
And the last question, whose budget? It sounds like if it's a growth product manager, it would come out of product's budget, the Facebook spend, the Google spend.
I think that's a tricky question. I think that's a really good question because I don't think a lot of organizations are set up to have this kind of budget. Mm-hmm. Even though, and I said, if your test fails, like, congratulations, you just learned that really cheaply. But like some team, probably marketing, has an ad budget, right? And they are held accountable for the success of that ad budget, right? Like, it's a really good question because you're getting right to like incentives. And so, if the test you run teaches you something, says like, yes, keep going, keep building, that's great, but it's not necessarily how marketing in a traditional organization is incentivized, right? They're incentivized to get signups today, not to prove that there is. So the answer is I don't really know. Again, it's company specific, like where the budget comes out of. You might have like a new products group. I think they'd be more likely to be running experiments like this and to have a budget for things like this. Mm-hmm. But it is hard because the cost savings from quote unquote building the wrong thing, like nobody really gets credit for that. Like, oh my God, like we ran this experiment for like $10,000 and it invalidated XYZ, and therefore we're not going to spend $1 million to build XYZ. We're going to pivot and do something else. Like, that's a really hard thing to measure, right? You're measuring a negative, the thing you did not build. So it's hard. I don't have an easy answer for which budget does it come out of. I think that the key thing is to figure out how do you, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, but like, how do you prove that these kinds of tests are really valuable? And to be honest, the best way to do it is to run the tests and to bring back the data. So hopefully somebody's got the budget to like front the prototype, right? And then you can bring it to, senior executive, whoever that person is, and say, look at what we learned. We thought we were going to do this. It says either yes, like double down, like look how much interest there is. And we can tell you like the cost per acquisition is going to be even lower than we thought. And this is the target audience. That's the other thing I didn't mention explicitly. Like you might know what the solution is, but you actually might be testing the audience. You might have the exact same solution, and it's like we're testing it. Like we did some tests at Citi by profession. We were looking at like doctors and entrepreneurs and some other professions that we were interested in. And so you might actually just be testing who it's the best fit for, and then from that, then you can iterate the product to make it really sing for that person.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it's budgeting season, so it's nice to project this into next year. And I think that it's collaboration, right? Like maybe the bulk of the budget will come from product, but then the skill set, we will definitely need to rely on marketing and analytics in addition to product.
Yeah, I mean, I think the companies, like I said, that have like sort of the growth hacking, growth product folks, mm-hmm. they're probably the closest to doing stuff like this already, whether they call it demand tests or not. But they're running lots of products meets marketing, like optimizing the cost per acquisition, lifetime value ratio. Like they're probably the right. If you're at an organization like that, that's probably the place to start. And if you're not, try to figure out how you can show great examples of what those companies are doing, or find someone who has, who will vouch for you and give you the freedom to run tests like this.
Okay. Well, thanks for the examples. It's really good to see visuals and, see all the thoughts written out. So I appreciate you putting together the deck. And then we're coming to the close. So the last question, the third question is, what questions do you have for all of us, the founder designthinking.com unicorns?
I'm interested in, I might sort of take the last question you asked me and kind of rephrase it a bit. And I'm curious for your thoughts. Like if you have an executive, and this comes up all the time. I work as a consultant right now. Like you have an executive and they have a very clear sense of like what they want, and they're like, I know what our customers want, and they want this, and like go do this. And I'm curious, for folks who are listening, and sometimes the answer is like, yep, like they've been working in this business for like 25 years or 5 years, whatever it is. Like the years necessarily don't matter, but like it's their company. Like they know what they want, like build what they want. But there are other times where you might be seeing some signals that there's not the customer demand that they assume there is, or you might just see other red flags. And I'm always interested in how you've approached situations like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a hard one because you don't want to make someone look bad, especially someone 100%. With like all the power. So in user interviews, we would put together reels of customers saying what like the CEO or the executive had said. And it's really still surprising for the executive because they're like, oh, I wouldn't have said it that way, or it's really nice to see someone riff with me and have the same problem and solution. And so that's always a charmer, like just to have validation. But then when it's different, I work with the analyst, or I do like my own SQL queries, and I want to make sure there's like revenue there. So if I'm going to propose a different solution or a different product, definitely the pitch will always come with like a new revenue stream, or like, like a Capital One. It's like, we're not going to like change anything unless we're going to make like 100 million. So it comes with like a nice new number that the executive will warm to. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. I think what I thought I heard you just say is like, don't bring problems, bring solutions, right? Or, if you're going to propose that, is that what you just said? Like if this isn't going to work, like have a strong recommendation of what to try instead.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. Profitable solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you that we didn't talk about it just now in the context of those tests, but like I alluded to it, like the cost per acquisition, the lifetime value, like understanding like is your solution that you're testing, like, for product folks that like are not able to put together, a simple business model, like I highly encourage them to be able to do so. The chief financial officer or someone from finance is going to like take it another step, many more steps further probably. But just being able to put together that basic math is really important. So you don't get caught, like you just said, proposing something and then like, yeah, but that's like chump change around here, especially in a bank context.
Do you have any other advice on, especially dealing with the egos and the personalities there?
I think you spoke to it some of like bring verbatims from customers, sometimes like videos or audio recordings of what people actually said to like make it really, really human. I think that can be helpful so that it's not just, you, the product team, the design team saying like, we tested this, I think that helps. It helps humanize it. I think on a much lower level, I think, this is a reason to involve lots and lots of people in user research is so they can develop that customer empathy themselves, and they can, often, sit in and listen live to interviews or at least be involved in sort of the readout. I think that helps just when people are closer to the problem that you're trying to solve. I think that's really, really helpful. And I think, yeah, I think a key thing is understanding, and this varies from person to person, executive to executive, but like some people are really, really data focused. Like they want to see the math behind it. They want to understand like, and so like one of the things that I try to learn when I meet new people is like, what is their this is not really, but like, what is their love language, right? Like, are they data people? Are they story people? Do they need to hear it from their colleague who's like at the
Right.
same level of them, but not
Absolutely.
from below? Like understanding those dynamics, which when you're a consultant is very tricky because like you just got there, right? And so like, I think that's really important. And so then when you understand that, then you can have, increasingly, tougher conversations about, what you're seeing or not seeing and whatever tests you're running.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant because as a consultant, you have to immediately understand their love language. Like if they're a data person or they want to see it in the code or they want to see it from their colleague or an influencer or Elon
Yep.
or, whoever it is, it's
Yeah.
like you have to pick up on that immediately. All right. Well, I think we should do our outro. So Dan, thank you so much for going into so much depth here. I think I'm ready to set up my first demand test. I don't know about people in the audience, but do you want to put a plug in for your podcast or anything that's coming up with Artium?
Sure. I mean, I would just say, would love to continue the conversation with anyone listening out there. Yes, I host, as I mentioned, a podcast called Crafted. It's a show about great products and the people who make them. We highlight founders and makers, and we get into the weeds of like a lot of the stuff we just got into of like what it takes to build something great and the iterations that they made along the way and the lessons they learned. You can find it in any of your podcast apps. It's called Crafted. And please, if you want to email me and continue the conversation, if Artium can help you, build a great product, a great team, or sort of, improve your capabilities. That's the thing we really focus on is helping you be a really amazing product team, for the long term with engineering, product, and design principles to match. So reach out. I'm at Dan Blumberg at thisisartium.com.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dan. I think we're at the hour mark. I really love the depth of this conversation. So the next episode will be with Adobe Express. Andy Lambert will be talking on this podcast about relaunching and also from a very heavy marketing and design perspective. So I think it's nice to continue the design marketing conversation. And I just want to give up some snaps for Dan for all your thoughtfulness and the deck and bringing all this detail to founderdesignThinking.com.
Thank you so much for having me. This was totally a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, everyone, leave your comments and I'll see you next time.